Hiya. So this is a follow-up video to my announcement video where I'm going to be cycling from Alaska to Argentina, and the purpose of this video is to talk about my bike setup. And to do that, I'm going to first start talking about my previous experience with bike touring, and then I'm going to talk about my bike setup and any customizations that I've made since purchasing it. I'm going to talk about pre-departure maintenance that I've done or am going to do, and I'm going to talk about what supplies I'm going to take with me on the journey. So I bought this bike in 2019. Before buying that bike, I used to have a Dawes Horizon from the mid-90s, and it was a steel touring bike, and it was just quite aged, but it got me through a few tours. So I cycled the Camino de Santiago and I cycled around Wales on it. But I wanted to take it to the next level and get a dedicated touring bike, and I arrived upon this Ridgeback Panorama. And from the time I've had this, I've cycled the North Coast 500 in Scotland, and I've cycled around Wales again, and I've cycled from John O'Groats to Land's End. And each of those trips taught me a couple of different things, and I customized my bike setup accordingly. So as a general summary of the bike, it's a steel frame. It's got a long chainstay length, got a wide gear range, and mounting points for a front and rear rack. And I believe I've got some photos of how it looked on stock, so I'll have them up on screen now. But in terms of customizations that I've made, so I've upgraded the rear rack. So I've installed a Tubus logo. It's not an Evo version, so it's the old version. And the reason I got that was because it allowed me to have the lower rails offset, so I could have my panniers a bit lower, get my center of gravity a bit lower. But also with the panniers that I have, I can overfill them, which then won't interfere with the rack bag on top. So it just gives me a bit more flexibility. With regards to the front rack, the bike actually didn't come with any front rack. So I installed a Tubus Tara, as you can see, and that was great for my trip around Wales, but I wanted to get a bit more bulk off the rear wheel. So to do that, I bought this front rack that's a platform. It's an Allegan, I'm not sure, I'll put the details on the screen. It's quite an expensive rack for what it is, but it was exactly the style that I wanted, and I was able to mount it with the mounting points on the inside of my fork, so I'm able to have two front racks on that. And that rack allows me to have my sleeping pad on there and my camping chair as well. So it gets those light but bulky items off the rear and onto the front, so it's not messing with the center of gravity too much, but it just means that it's a little bit less cluttered on the rear end. That rack also has a mounting point for a light, which I have set up, and you'll see on the racks where I've got the mounting points for the panniers, I've installed some tubing just to give a bit of protection. And then onto the disc brakes. So I upgraded the rotors. They were 160s, I believe, but now I upgraded them to 180s. I'm going to need to stop this and come back. Ugh. Raining. Yeah, so I was talking about the brakes, and yeah, I got larger disc rotors, and the reason for that was because when I was doing the Wales tour, I was descending down a hill, quite a steep hill, and I had 4 panniers on at the time, and it just put too much strain on the brakes, and the rotor that I had on ended up getting too hot, and I ended up getting brake fade, and it got pretty dangerous. I couldn't stop for a junction that I was approaching, and luckily there wasn't a car. But I've got a larger discs now, so that's more material to heat up, so it should take longer to do that if that happens again. And then that brings us on to the wheels actually. So the stock wheels that came with the bike, the hubs that they had was Jalmco or something like that. It was quite atypical, and I was really struggling to find replacement cups and cones for it, and I was having a bit of a tough time with the bearings wearing out, particularly on the rear wheel. And it was very frustrating to get cup and cone bearings dialed in, at least in my experience. So I decided to upgrade my wheels, and when I upgraded them, I got 36 spoke wheels, and I got them built with cartridge style hubs, which should be a lot more reliable in the long run. They're not as serviceable off the side of the road, but I can take with me replacement bearings, which are going to be very light and not take up much space at all. And I'm sure most mechanics will be able to help me out with extracting and pushing in the bearings. But I got them built up by Joey from Strongheart Wheelworks in Bristol, and she was very helpful in I don't know if you can hear them. And Joey was very helpful with giving recommendations and building up the wheels, and I took them on my tour from John O'Groats to Land's End, and also my tour in Normandy with Joe this year, and I'm very happy with them. Yeah, I'd recommend going to Joey if you're looking for wheels and you're in that area. I'll include a link to her page somewhere in the video, like either in the description or in the corner, you'll see it anyway. So I made the stem a little bit higher and got a shorter stem just to kind of get a more comfortable riding position, and I've got a Brooks Cambium saddle, and I find that incredibly comfortable. I've used it since, well, the first tour that I used it on was in the North Coast 500, but I've done long rides on it previously without touring, so doing Audaxes or like 100k rides or something like that. I'm very happy with the saddle, and that'll be coming with me. You can see my pump mounted there. I did used to have a frame pump, but I wasn't too happy with it because I had to connect the pump directly to the valve, which caused excessive pressure on the valve core, or on the valve, and I wasn't comfortable with that as a long-term solution. So I upgraded my pump to this Topeak Road Morph G, which has a gauge on it, but it's also connected via a sort of flexible tube, and it's also got a bit of a kickstand, and you can pump it off the floor, so it's very efficient, and it tucks away quite nicely. And another bonus is that it doesn't take up the entirety of the top tube, so I'm able to use the trekking pole as my prop stand and mount it onto the top tube, because previously I had to wrap that around the rear triangle, and it was just not as sleek a solution. Other than that, there's not too much in the way of customization. I've put on some dual-sided pedals, so I can wear various shoes. I can use SPD clip-in shoes, or I can use some walking shoes, or whatever I choose. So now I'm going to talk about the maintenance that I've done on the bike. So I've put a new chain on, I've cleaned the drivetrain in general, I've put new cable housing and cables in for the brake cables and for the gear cables as well. I've also put new handlebar tape on and generally gave things a bit of a clean. I also replaced the bottom bracket because that was starting to feel a little bit gritty, but I think that should last me a long time as well, hopefully at least 500 kilometers, so that'll get me maybe to California or something like that, where I'll be able to get another one. And the last thing is, I've not done that yet, but the rear tyre is defective, so I've got a new one which I'm going to replace. The front one's fine, but because there tends to be quicker wear on the rear tyre, I'm going to replace that, and I'm hoping that they would both come to need replacing at about the same time, at which point I'll try to get a slightly wider tyre. At the moment I'm using 38mm Schwalbe Marathon Plus tyres. I think my maximum tyre width is 42mm, so I'm hoping to take advantage of that. The limiting factor is this part of the frame here, where it gets a little bit tight. So now I'm going to talk about the supplies that I'll take with me on the road. This is just an initial setup. I expect this will evolve over time. But if we start down here, we've got a set of tyre levers for removing tyres. And then this is my multi-tool. That's actually a ratchet set. It's got a secondary set of tyre levers in there. But it's got a ratchet tool, a chain tool, and then various attachments as well. So that's more of a convenience tool than anything because of the ratchet. It just helps speed up some of the maintenance tasks. Here I've got a Crank Brothers tool. I think it's an M19, yes. And this has pretty much every tool that I require on my bike for general maintenance. It's even got spoke tools as well. Here I've got a spanner that I believe has 8mm and 8mm and 9mm. That's mainly for my mud guards that I'm going to be using that for. I've got an adjustable spanner which I'll be able to use for various different things. It's quite a compact one, but it also goes wide enough so that I can use it with this cassette tool here. I don't have a chain whip in my tool kit. On previous occasions I've been able to use the chain that I'm using on my bike to hold the cassette in place whilst I unscrew it. Here I've got a tool for my crank set, so I can take that off if I need to. I don't have a bottom bracket tool. Well, I have that, but I've decided not to take it with me. That's actually this tool here. I feel like it's something that I'm not going to require often, and considering it's quite large and bulky, I've decided not to take this, considering how seldom the bottom bracket needs servicing. And then going along to the left, the other tools I've got, a chain breaker tool for the multi-links. Just to kind of skip over this one, here is a chain checker so I can measure the stretch on my chain. And I've got a Leatherman Wave Plus, and this has various tools that I'm going to use for camping. It's got knives and tin opener and various different things, but one of the main benefits for this is it's got the pliers and the cutters and also crimp tools, so I can use that for replacing my gear and brake cables. But it's got other uses as well. So obviously there's knives, all different stuff. I think this one's a saw as well, if I need to chop some wood or something for whatever reason. But it's fairly versatile, compact, and I'm sure I'll use that fair bit. This tool here is just for cleaning and brushing off any grime along my drivetrain. The next few items address common breakdown. So obviously this is a bulk pack of tire or inner tube patches, so hopefully that'll last me some time. And I got these sealants or rubber, what are they called? Rubber solutions. So that's for sticking the patches on the inner tube to repair a puncture. I've got one spare inner tube. I may upgrade that to have 2 spare inner tubes, but at the moment that's just what I've got in mind. Here is a tire boot, just in case I have a large hole in my tire, so I can repair that until I get an opportunity to replace my tires. We've got some cable ties. These are very versatile for a variety of different problems. Here I've got a couple of cables for the brake cables and gear cables as well. This is a spare mount for my front light. I'm likely not to need this, but I just wanted it because it's a very bespoke mount style that it has. I just wanted to have a spare just in case. I've got some Gorilla tape, which is actually kind of thin, and some electrical tape, which I can use both of those for various different uses. I can use it for patching holes in my tent or panniers. I can use them for handlebar tape and things like that. I've got some thread lock to make sure that the bolts don't rattle loose. Some super glue for general fixing. This is a spare mount for my Garmin bike computer, just in case the one I've got attached to my bike right now fails. Then I've got some spare brake pads. I've been in the middle of a tour previously where I have worn through my brake pads and there wasn't a replacement for a good few miles. So considering there's a lot of remote places along the trip, I'm taking a few spare brake pads, especially considering they're so small and light there's no reason not to take a few different pairs. I've got some spare headset bearings. The ones I've got on my bike at the moment are fine, but they're coming towards the end of life, so I've got them just in case. I've got some bike grease, which is good for keeping the moisture out around bearings like the headset bearings and the bottom bracket and things like that. Then I've got different types of lube. So I've got the wet lube that I'll use in wet scenarios, but I'll try to use squirt chain lube, which is a wax-based lube, as much as I can, because I've had pretty good results with that in the past, and it's made my chain last a lot longer than I had previously used it. So I'll try to use that as much as I can, but I expect that will become difficult to source further along my trip. Then here I've got some various different accessories for inner cables. Here are some chain links. Again, similar case to the brake pads. Because these are so small and light, I figured I may as well grab quite a few of them, because it's not much space and not much weight to worry about. Here in this box I've got various different bolts, just in case any bolts break on my trip. I'll have replacements of varying different lengths, and I've got some spacers and washers and things like that amongst there, so that's there if I need it. I'm going to carry a spare chain for some of my journey. I may end up not carrying a spare chain until I start to become close to wearing it out, but I'll adapt that as it goes. And then in this box here I have spare parts for the cleats on my shoes, so a few spare bolts and spacers and whatnot. On my previous tour I lost one of the bolts, and it just meant that I couldn't clip in my shoes. I'll try to use the most of this space in this box, so I may put, say for example, these in here, just to kind of be a bit more space efficient in my packing. And then these two bags here are canvas bags that I got, and my aim is to have tools stored in one and then replacement parts in the other, but I may adapt that as I go along. I recently saw Toby and Louisa's video from Chains and Cords, and they packed their tools with the replacement items that were associated with that repair. So that sounded like a very good idea to me, and it might be a lot more efficient. Not seen here, I have some spare spokes that I got from Joey when I bought my wheels off her. They will be packed in my panniers separate to my tools stuff, because they take up space a bit differently. But on my packing video and my luggage video, I'll show them to you and go through all that. But I hope this is helpful. I'm not going to be able to do a very clean outro because of the rain, but thanks for watching, and again, if you have any questions about my toolkit, or if there's anything you think that I haven't thought about, feel free to send a comment and I'll try to address that. But thank you for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.